So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about D&D and about Rock of Cairbryn and Copper Guardians, our two series we have going on, as well as series we've done in the past. We'll talk more in general about Dungeons and Dragons. And and whatever you guys want to know, whatever questions you might have, any of that, please forward your questions. Ask away, because we are here today to find out what you want to know, because you guys are always coming into the chat, which I really appreciate. And you mention to me quite frequently, what's going on? I don't understand. Who's this? What's that? Da, 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 da. So in order to sort of help out with that, I wanted to open up a bit of a discussion today when there's no big things going on or no D&D related things happening. So I guess where to begin? Let's begin at the beginning. So why are we doing this today? Well, today is a good day to do this because it's Wednesday. This is normally when we stream Rock of Cairbryn when we're doing that. Of course, we stream Copper Guardians on a Monday. Both of those happen on a monthly basis. If you go to our YouTube channel and check YouTube, it pops up. The episodes pop up every 2 weeks, or every 2 weeks. There's 2 episodes per a 2-week period. So effectively, we get full coverage for most months with episodes, which is kind of the reasoning for doing it. I publish them on a Monday. So in case you missed anything, you can catch up and find out what's going on. With all that said and done, we have been doing that kind of thing for a while. The initial attempt to do this began in 2021, I think, is when we first started Rock of Cairbryn in the spring, maybe that late winter. I think it was early spring, though, but I could be wrong. It might have been the beginning of March in 2021. That series started from a small group. We had 3, and then it just kind of kept growing after that. We had some changes in membership. And so if you go back and watch the original series, it included Austin, who's no longer with Distractions. He does have his own channel, so if you're curious in checking out what he's doing these days, you can check him out at twitch.tv/CZDrop. CZ is SEZ or Z for some of you. YDROP. ZZ Drop.
Hi, my name is Austin, and this is Dungeons and Dragons Beams.
This time for real.
This time for real?
Time for real.
With feeling.
In your house at this time in 11 in East America. Hey, enough fumbling. What's up?
It's an Animorph series that they have been streaming over there. So if you want to go check out and see what he's up to, you're more than welcome to go ahead and do that. And so that's kind of what he's gone off to do. And he has, like I said, a totally different group, which is great. And I think they have a lot of fun. Any which way, to go back to the discussion in general and get back into things a little bit. So without going into the whole discussion about the foundations of Distractions, we'll go in instead to how our podcast, which is how we began. So we started initially with Dungeons and Distractions based on what was then D&D 4th edition, which is a controversial edition in D&D history because it is it was a big change from previous editions, especially from Wizards of the Coast. It was built around the idea of being aimed at people who didn't understand or know or have full concepts of how D&D worked. So if you're new to the D&D universe, it is a good starter edition because things are very formalized and they're very controlled, and you pick certain things, and you only have a limited amount of things you can slot things into, which, if you're new, I actually think works really well because you're not getting confused or bogged down by a million rules or a million different options. But the problem of it is, and this is, one of the reasons why people started to dislike it, is because one of the reasons why people do play D&D is because they like the options and opportunities and differences. And in some cases, I think I always found it that after playing it for a while, probably one of the biggest issues I ended up having with it is that depending on what type of character you were, if you picked the wrong class, your life could be pretty miserable. There was no way to make it really better because you didn't have alternatives, right? So if you'd made a mistake and you picked a class that's kind of weak and you thought, well, they'd be good for role play, but then when you have to actually fight things, they're kind of useless, that becomes a bit of an issue for anybody who is stuck with that. And so either you have to go create a new character, change classes, and all the fun that entails. That's always something that's going to be a bit of an issue for everyone. And like I said, I think a lot of the older players who'd played D&D from ancient times didn't like it because of that. When we moved on and Webby, when he took over Dungeon Master in the Dungeons & Dragons game that we were playing, he basically wanted everybody to move to 5th edition. And at the time, I remember being kind of skeptical of that because I actually liked 4th edition compared to a lot of other people because of the abilities that you had to sort of limit the chaos, I guess I would call it. He argued, and as it turned out very accurately so, is that 5th edition allows for a lot of the specializations that people love, but it does it in a way that limits the chaos because you can't go right off crazy. So let's talk about how our game works, how you set up a character, and how you reach out and develop those kind of things. We'll talk, basically, we're going to go into categories. We're going to go into a player category discussion. We're going to go into an NPC category discussion, both in general rather than in specifics. Then we'll go into Roll20, and I'll show you the tools that we use there and how they affect the game. There will be a little bit of behind the scenes stuff because I'll use my login, but so this is where I usually like to start. This is called D&D Beyond, as you can see at the top. D&D Beyond is a Dungeons & Dragons website that was developed, I think, outside of Wizards of the Coast, but has now been brought into Wizards of the Coast, the main owners of Dungeons & Dragons. And they will be continuing to develop this into a digital format for a number of different things, one of which is the actual game itself. They will eventually be allowing you to create digital landscapes and player pieces and all sorts of things. So it'll look more like a digital version of a regular game you would play on boards and around tables. Keeping in mind that Dungeons & Dragons started out as a paper and pen game. Typically, when we used to play, we didn't even have like any maps or anything. That came later. We had just use your imagination and pretend you see this. And so then what would happen if we were in a place where we were unfamiliar is somebody would have a graph paper and then they would just draw where they think we went so that we had some sort of map. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it was a little off. But it was fun in that respect. And then later on, we got a whiteboard with magic erase markers. And those helped because then you could actually draw stuff out. You could give your players kind of an understanding of what was happening. It wasn't fancy. You're just drawing with a pen, so you're doing effectively stick things and outlines of things. But yet, it gave your players the opportunity to kind of understand. And we generally would get miniatures. So they'd look sort of like the players. They weren't necessarily a one-to-one comparison, shall we say. But they were still fun and useful. And it's always fun to look for those when you're wanting a player character and you're kind of, especially if you really like your player character, because you want them to really get as close as you can to the appearance of them. And then kind of sometimes it then goes back and sort of dictates how you think your player character looks. So it's kind of cool. So anyway, so going back to this. So what we have here initially, so you've got your subscriptions. That does cost money to use some parts of this. Aspects of it are free, but they're only free to a degree. So like if you want to create a character or participate in a campaign, that's free. However, and then right away, boop, it's free, but you don't get access to everything that way. So as I'm saying this, let me show you what I mean. So you want to build a character. So you go into that, and there you go. There's your character. They give you a fake name, and then you select the options you want. And then you eliminate the ones you don't, and you can add different optional class features, customize your origins, blah, 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 blah. Then you decide on how your characters are going to progress, milestones and XP. If somebody really wants to know, they can ask me what this is. I'm not going to worry about it. Hit point types. So you can either have a standard hit point or you can individually roll your hit points. So you get to decide, you know, by the luck what your hit points are. There's all those kind of things. They can use things like encumbrance, which as a DM I don't care about, but I know some DMs get very obsessed with. And that includes like, how many coins are you carrying? Well, they weigh this much, blah, 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 blah. You know, so you can't carry tens of thousands of coins around in your pocket. I mean, honestly, you keep track of what you have, but this is why generally I give out bags of holding and things like that right away. Because to me, it's the most annoying aspect of D&D is when you get down to, let's pen and paper everything. And I'm just like, I just don't want to do that. So here's the categories of things. So here's where you can automatically start to see the problems come in if you're just on the free version of this game. So if you're in the free version, you get access to very few of these characters, like not even close to the same amount. Whereas because I have access to the entire list, in part thanks to my own acquisitions, but also because Webby basically said, hey, here's access to everything. So I can access any type of race plus all of their subcategories. So if you go into ASMR or ASMR, there's all of these classes that they have, or racial variant types. I believe it's the same for some, like a Genasi. There's them, blah, 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 blah. Halflings have a bunch of different things too. So like some of this may go away in years to come, but for the moment, this is the kind of thing. Mark of finding half orc. Interesting. And so you then choose your racial class. So let's just go. What is this mark of detection? Mark of storm. These are new. All right. So we're going to pick them. And so it'll be like, what do you want to do? Da, 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 da. You get this, you get that. These are all the skills you earn just for being this race. Now, humans get more access, but in order to get that, they give up some others. So like you don't get dark vision, for example. And then you get to pick a couple of different things. So just randomly, we're just going to pick, because we're not going to complete this character. I just want to put it up there just so you guys can see. So we know that it'll already have Fae. So we'll go, don't know what that is. Deep speech is kind of pointless. I don't know. To me, it's not one of the more exciting ones. I think a lot of these are from the new books, but I don't know them. So we'll just go Sylvan. Then we'll go next. So then you get into the amount of options you have for types of classes you can take. And again, not all of these are going to show if you have the free model, because they just don't necessarily give you access to everything. So you pick your categories of things. You go through the next part. Let's just pick, for the fun of it, we'll pick Barbarian. My favorite character I've ever run as a player character is a Barbarian. So much like Webby's Minotaur, however, in Copper Guardians, that she was a female. If you've been watching Rock of Cairbryn, there's been some mention of her in the Rock of Cairbryn, because I gave Bart her weapon, but what I did was I just grabbed the weapon as it was told to me in the game and then gave him access to that weapon. And so, But I never said it was her weapon. I just said he just got access to this weapon. And so she's not ever going to appear in the game. If I did, that'd be silly. So yeah, so that's what they start off with. They have a bunch of basic stuff that they start off with, but they get more as time goes on. And you'll see the level climb can be quite severe. So like you get 4th level, you get a big choice. Like you get bigger choices at times than you do at other times. So like the ability score improvement, basically you have to choose what you want to put your efforts into. And then you get different things. And as you get up, the idea is as you get to these higher levels, your character becomes godlike in aspects, so that effectively fighting a 20th level version of yourself would be like fighting a god. That's kind of the point of it. So typically I've never had a character that's got even close to this. The closest was Brenna, and I think she was 14th. She never got to persistent rage, for example, which literally would be awesome because you don't lose your rage unless you're knocked unconscious or you choose to end it, which is a big thing for barbarians, because basically what happens is if you rage, it's an assist to you as a barbarian, but it goes away if you aren't hitting something or something is not hitting you, which can be a bit of a nuisance in a fight, because there are times where you're just standing there after killing a bunch of people and not doing anything for a round because you got to move towards a bunch of people. And by the time you get towards them, it's been 2 rounds, and all of a sudden you don't have your rage, and you have to do that again, which then costs time. And I believe it's a bonus action. Okay, so it's not like it's a full-on detriment, but it is a nuisance. So it's good to not have that hanging over your head. They have other features which you can get. We're not going to do the whole thing, but I just wanted to kind of give an initial showing of what they option. Now, the reason why I do this, and I'll show you Roll20 has a similar builder, is because for me, this is easier to see because it's intertwined with D&D Beyond. The character creator here is much more versed with all the books and all the options. So you get access to stuff that you can't when you're trying to do this on Roll20. And so you don't always see every choice you could make, and you don't have every sort of link point. And if you have a good DM who has access to D&D Beyond, they do, if they spend the money, and let's be clear, you got to spend the money, you can do this. So like under my campaign, so let's go to these campaigns, okay? So you'll see that it says content sharing enabled by Lindstedt, right? Content sharing enabled by Lindstedt, content sharing enabled by Lindstedt. Now, what it doesn't show you is it doesn't show you Copper Guardians, because Copper Guardians, it's the other way around. But, I don't know, sorry. It's intermixed with the Rock of Cairbryn because Webby did it that way. That's how we did that, just so that everybody had access to it. So now, if you view the campaign, each of these characters can use any book that we have. So to show you what that means, and I know we've done this whole discussion in the past, so I don't want to spend loads of time on it, but I want you to understand kind of the basics of some of it. So basically, these are all books, and they're all books of various types. So if we go into that and view them all, now you can see them. So like your base standard one you want when you begin Dungeons and Dragons, you want a player's handbook, and if you're going to dungeon master, which at some point you probably will, you want a dungeon master guide, and you want a monster manual. Those are the 3 books that you cannot play the game without at least 2 of them, but you definitely want the monster manual, because then it gives you a list of bad guys that you can easily use rather than having to invent them all the time, which can be a little frustrating. There's also the basic rules book, which comes for free. This gives you some of the basics so you can get started, which is nice. It's good to have access to that. But I mean, if you want to get the game properly going, the good news about those kind of things is they're actually cheaper than they are in physical copy. Like, for example, if I was to pull the player's handbook as I have it here, there we go. So that's the actual copy physically of the book. This one's well worn, you can tell, because it's got somebody's notes in them, or at least some cards in the back, and the spine is pretty crackly, so yes, you can tell it's been well loved. These books are expensive, especially here in Canada. Like they run between $60 to $80, depending on what kind of book we're talking about. They're slightly cheaper in America. I think they're like $45 for the base book, and then somewhere above that for other books sometimes. And packs, like you can get the Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and Monster Manual in a collection. They are very expensive, but I think it's cheaper than buying them individually. So if you're looking at adding all three, that's a good point, a way to do that. If you get the fancy one, though, it's not. Because there's a fancy version, which is like $150, which can run really well north of where you want to spend. Let's just have a look at the back of this one. Yeah, so like this book here is $65 Canadian or $50 American currently. But the thing with this book is, and the thing with the game shops that I have access to, is they've gotten actually good at offering discounts. So that was not the amount of money I spent on that book. But digitally, so if I go into, we'll go into one that I don't have, because if I go into that, that's not going to be helpful. So let's go into Radiant Citadel, because I have that's what this is. I've got the actual physical copy. But if I purchase this today, this will be in Canadian dollars. Or no, this is American dollars. So American price, actual physical book, $50. Book online, $30. So if you're looking to save money, digital copies are cheaper. You can get them cheaper in some other places too. However, I will say, if you're wanting to refer to them, we'll go into the Player's Handbook, because that's simple enough. So when you go into it, this is what it looks like. So you can look at the cover if you really desire to, but it's not a part of what you're seeing, really. So now you have a digital setup, so you have access to it this way, which is nice because you can kind of quickly go through things. It's like having an appendix a little bit quicker. Of course, you can search things up a little easier too because of that. So in that respect, the digital copies are nicer for those kind of things. Plus, they don't get worn down or broken spines or any number of things happen to them, like we've had happen in the other past, where you get coffee rings and spilled hot chocolate and all sorts of fun stuff get covered in the books. But like if you look, they'll have all the information you need. You click on that and you get something that approximates the style of the book. So you can read the introduction. So they give you little tips and tricks and kind of the beginning of how you create a character, how characters work in Dungeons and Dragons, and kind of an understanding of how the game functions from the aspect of, I'm new, I don't know anything about it, how does this work? So if you're good at reading, this is very helpful, because it does give you that. I can say you can get bogged down. I've never read it from cover to cover. What I typically do, and I think pretty much everyone else does, is you just refer to the parts that you need at the time you need them. So say you're, how do I make an attack? You just click on this and you go, okay, that's how we make an attack. We choose our target. Surprise, surprise. You determine whatever modifiers you have, if you have advantage or disadvantage. Explain that in a minute. And then resolve the attack. Now, I remember when 5th edition came out and it was talking about advantage and disadvantage, I thought this was going to be so cumbersome and so difficult to figure out. And now that I've played it for so long, it's just second nature now. And it's like, oh, right, yeah, this used to be difficult. Now, it was just on first reading, I remember thinking, wow, don't know if I like this. But the cool thing is that they've done with 5th edition, and they're doing currently with what they're calling D&D 1, or 1 D&D, sorry, other way around, is they're trying to do playtests. Now, I know, as per usual, in any community, people are sassy about whether that's actually what they're doing or if they're just looking for permission to do whatever they want. But nonetheless, I mean, with D&D 5th edition, they really wanted to repair the relationship they had with the public, because 4th edition had been so crapped on that they worked really hard to, put out play tests, let people try things, say what worked, say what didn't, what they like about the game, what they don't like, and how things could change or be addition to. And I think that's why 5th edition works so well. You go into the adventures, okay? So these are really neat. So you have like Lost Mind of Fanandelver, Horde of the Dragon Queen, Rise of Tiamat, Princes of the Apocalypse. All of these are stories in which a dungeon master who's starting out could basically just take this book, follow it piece by piece, and it will give you what to say and kind of an idea of what's coming, and NPCs that you can use to kind of fill out the story. So it's a great way when you're beginning to kind of allow yourself to immerse yourself into the D&D world without having to instantly know everything and understand how the game works perfectly, because you can use the built-in storyline to build your rules set, right? So you have all of these various things. And like Candlekeep Mysteries is all based around a university or a wizard's tower. And so everything sort of is related to that. Like you do everything from a book. They find a book. They open the book. The book tells them what to do next. And they go through that. They have a Rick and Morty's version of Dungeons and Dragons. They have, various other things. And so each of these give you a way to build a character while helping a DM who may not be sure what they're doing to create something that's cool and unique for the for their players. So it's cool in that respect, and I think it's something that is really a neat thing that they've done. But when you've done Dungeons and Dragons for a while, I know for me, I would struggle to go through one of these with someone. I think the difficulty I would find with it is just because there's no innovation from this directly. So what I've done with these books, so like this is the normal cover of the Radiant Citadel, is I'm using them to kind of pull things out that I can push the players with so that I don't have to come up with it off the top of my head, but I'm not using the whole book, and I'm not trying to make the book be the thing. So like The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, this will be one that I will use if they ever go to what we would consider to be the equivalent of the Feywild in my stories. They've never gone there. The other aspect of things that you can look at with all of these, like I said, is they're very expensive if you buy every one. So don't, think you need to buy all of them. They're not all necessary, and there's parts of it if you really want like a specific character type, you can just buy the character type individually. Or like I said, if you have a DM who's bought all this stuff, he can give you access to it so your player base can use it. The other cool thing with D&D Beyond, but it's of less use right now, in my opinion, is they have a built-in dice roller system. So if we go to my characters, for example, see if they had a map system, and this has always been my contention about this, is them not having the map system makes it difficult for me to get excited about this. So let's say we go into this character, because this character is a current character that I don't play on anything. It's not an online gaming type one. So like if I roll the dice here and I go click, then I have to choose normal advantage, we'll say, for the heck of it. Or no, disadvantage. Roll. Now you see the dice roll, which is cool. And you get the little sound, and then it gives you the actual result. So because it's disadvantage, you have to take the lower one. This is what we were talking about. So you roll 2 dice. One is the advantage dice or disadvantage dice. And depending on the result, if it's a disadvantage, you take the lower roll. If it's advantage, you take the higher roll. So that's how that works. So it's actually pretty straightforward. But when I initially read it, I was like, what? That's so complicated. I remember being very confused initially about that. So that's D&D Beyond and D&D 5th edition. How they work, how they're kind of defined. As I said, you have these neat little things. So like you got your current hit points. It keeps track of your spells, so you can go down here and reference them. And what's really cool, in my opinion, is that if you need to do something, you can just click that. If you want to cast the spell, you just click it. That kind of thing. And then when you're doing these spells, you can then mark them off. So immediately, if I cast Bless, for example, so let's say I cast Bless, pops up, gives me the information about it, and then I just tick it off. And in this case, it auto ticks it off, which is really nice. And then when you have your long rest, which basically Short rest is when you sit down for 10 minutes or an hour, I guess, and just kind of you're recovering from your injuries or your fight. A long rest is when you actually sleep, or yeah, it's usually a sleep that you have to do for 8 hours. Then you can hit that, and as soon as you take the long rest, it then resets everything, and you'll notice that take long rest. Confirm. I didn't confirm it, that's why. So now you'll see that that's out of there. So now you've taken your long rest, everything's cleared. If you take your short rest, it'll clear any damage you've taken, because you can, or it won't take rid of damage, but it'll give you ability back on some things. But you can use the time to sort of deal with damage. But yeah, it's really quite interesting and quite entertaining. I love these character sheets. I really wish Roll20 had this style, because this is such a nicer one than what Roll20's got, which I will show you in a second. I think the design is much nicer. It reminds me more of what we would always do, and we would do it on the pen and paper version. But because there's no mapping system, it makes it difficult. I mean, you can use Roll20. Tamara's explained to me there is a way to use it with Roll20, and I've looked at that, but the problem with it is that what you run into is the characters will have issues, because you're looking at this, then you have to roll that, then you have to go back to this, and then go back to that, and sometimes the dice rolls are a little wanky, and Chrome doesn't always work very well with Roll20, so adding other things to the games can be kind of problematic. So this is where I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if I like that idea. All right, so we'll open up Newbie One Shot, because that one I don't care about. So let's launch. Oops, I didn't launch the game. Okay, so this is Roll20. Roll20 is our base gaming map system. In fact, I used this for Maisie when creating Jilly. We wanted to kind of test her character, but we never got there. So, and we tried some lighting systems, which didn't work either, which was kind of annoying. So this will give you a background of how this design goes. So you have, if we start over here, so under this tab, the little news tab, you have the list of characters. As a DM, you can see everybody. As a player, you only really see yourself, unless the DM has made it accessible to you. The cool thing that DMs have access to on Roll20, especially if they paid for it, again, there's always a money cost, you can import characters quickly into the game. So like, if you notice the goblins here, they are not my creation. These are the creations that come out of D&D. And so that's why they have their own token, and then it's all pre-filled in. So I don't have to do this, which is kind of nice. And it makes it really easy to create a lot of NPCs really quickly, especially if you're just doing one type, because you can quickly type them up. So to do that, you just go here and you go dragon, for example, and you go search, and it says creatures by type, or, and this is the key point, monsters. Then you have all these dragon options. And so to bring them into the game, you just do that. And that brings them into the game. And now all of a sudden you have access to a dragon with its token and its character sheet of information. And it's very nice, because then it saves you a lot of bother. And I will say this, thankfully, is that Rob and Webby introduced me to this kind of thing. I had played with Roll20 for the better part of 7 years and did not know any of this. So they're like, by the way, you could just do this. And I'm like, oh. So like getting spells and all of that stuff was so much simpler since then. So it's made the game a little easier for me. And it also puts in their hit points and their armor class, so you can see it while you're moving stuff around. So like if they had put that in, I could see it here too, but like all my NPCs have that. So you can see the difference between a dragon at 256 hit points and a 19 armor class. Oh, am I on the map? No, I'm on the object. Why is the... Token layer. You guys are supposed to be on the token layer, dum-dums. So we'll talk a little bit about this other stuff for Roll20, but just to kind of intro this kind of stuff. So anyway, so if we go back and look at our boys here, they have a 15 armor class and they're 7 hit points. So if they get hit, they're basically dead, especially by characters that are 5th level, like Dimitri and Jilly. Or 4th level, I guess, sorry. So as a player character, this is how your character sheet works. So you come up onto this, and there's your character design. I'll briefly show you how that works. And then you have your character sheet here, which actually looks very similar to the older printed edition character sheets. But the big problem is much like those character sheets, you have to use pages effectively to get to certain stuff. So it's not as straightforward. But it's nice. And plus you can put stuff in to sort of make it easier on your person fighting. So you have things like this. So like when Jilly wants to attack, she has to click the rapier. So let's just open this up so you can see this. So like, let's say she attacks. So now she's rolled her dice and I've shown it with advantage and disadvantage. So we say it's 22 because normally it's the one on the left. So she hits, let's say, for example. So then what you then do, and this is what we're always telling everybody else to do, is you have to click here. If you click over here, it doesn't work as well. If you click over here, it immediately gives you what the damage is. So it's very simple and straightforward once it's set up. And that's the big problem, is you have to set it up in advance, and it takes a lot of time. Once you have it set up, though, it's really simple to control character design and have that kind of stuff. Like you just put all this stuff in. And everybody does it differently. Like I always put my big numbers here and then the little number there. But like Rob did this his way, which is to do it the opposite way around, which is perfectly acceptable. There's no right or wrong. So then for further information, you can go into their bio. So like, for example, everything that was in her backpack, I basically put under treasure here. And then in spells, if she had spells, which she doesn't as a rogue, they would be listed here. So with Dimitri, you open the character sheet and you'll see his is a lot more filled out. Just because Rob, A, knows the game very well. B, his character has a lot more about him, which is a little different because he's a bard. So he has access to spells. And this is how it's done here. So the way Rob's done it, well, the way I've done it here, but sometimes you do it differently depending on the situation. If you have access to more spells, you might want to put them there, but you have to show how many prepared spells you have, and this is where it differs from D&D Beyond, where it shows you automatically the prepared spells versus the unprepared spells. However, that's manual. So there's no long rest button to reset. You have to then go back and click it back in if you want to make it work. So it's good and bad. It has some great ability stuff. It is very flexible. I've used it for totally different RPGs, and it works just as well, if not better in some respects. But it is because it's so generic, sometimes it's not as well suited. Map design is fun because you don't start off with like this. You start off with this. That's your map. So effectively what you have to do as a DM is you have to design this map to make it interesting to your player. So go back to the whiteboard style. So in the old days of the whiteboard, you would go like this, you know, you would draw a little square and then you would do a little circle for each of the things. So let's say that's a castle and we've got all of the little turrets. Oops, shoot. And as I said, depending on how good of an artist you are, this was basically your castle, right? And then the players would play in this. So you'd end up with like, let's put Dimitri on here. So you'd end up with Dimitri in there and you zoom in, blah, blah, blah. It still works. I mean, if you're playing and you're not streaming, it still works just fine. People will figure it out and they'll be able to use their imagination to kind of see what they want to see. but like, because you could do like, well, these are stairs, and you draw the stairs, or this is a pool of water, or, and you just like take a freehand and you go, let's say, bleh, and you just want to go, this is the water that's outside. So this is the moat, right? And then you want to go bridge, and you go, this is the bridge that goes across the moat. And so, like I said, you can do all this stuff. It's not difficult, but you can tell right now I am a terrible artist. This is terrible even by my standards, but it's because we're freehanding with a mouse. But like, that is a map that you could use, and it would be just as valid as the fancier ones, which, to be fair, the fancier ones like this. So like, for example, this is a map I've designed using Incarnate, which is a mapping drawing thing. And it's cool because it gives you like, you can easily make a map. It doesn't take a lot of genius or a lot of talent because it's all there and you can design it yourself. So again, there's always costs involved in these things. Luckily, Incarnate's super cheap. So it's not too expensive. But if you wanted to have a map with a bridge and a cool river, and it's relatively inexpensive to create something like that. In fact, it's free for some of the early, like, beginning stuff. But if you want to get access to most of it, it's going to cost you a little bit of money. So if you're streaming, that's one thing that I would always say, get the highest level you can get, because it's going to give you lots of good information and good ability to create interesting maps. So that's what I generally do use. So yeah. So that's Roll20. That's how it works design-wise. However, this is how you dice roll in Roll20. It's not as fancy, but it works fine. You can click on these, and that will roll for you. We showed you the earlier one where you just click on the item. But say the DM says, roll a d20 for me, and he doesn't give you any information, so you just roll a d20. There you go. I rolled my d20, and it gave me a 9. So that's how you do that. If your DM really wants to be, is not wanting to play in the digital space, he'll have his own set of dice and he'll use those. They do put the fear of God in you when you hear them rolling, because it makes it a lot more real when you hear, 24 d10s rolling, or instead of like, let me just click a d10. If I go 24 d10s out of curiosity, right? So 24 d10s, and I roll it, blam, and you get 130, right? So that's not as fun as hearing, and you're like, how many dice do you have? What are you doing? What's going on? Blah, blah, blah. But this is much more effective. Also, conveniently, if you have to re-roll something, you just go like that. It re-rolls it. So there you go. So the dice roller is pretty efficient. That's one of the reasons why we like Roll20, is the efficiency level, and it's free for most people. So that's one of the aspects that makes it good. And again, the part that isn't free is cheap. Like, you can pay an annual fee of like, I think $60 or like $5 a month, and you get access to an ability to, if you're a DM, it's really helpful because you can have like loads and loads of images and stuff that you can upload, because you get a massive amount of space. If you really want to become integrated with this, and it doesn't always work terribly well, which is why we've never done it, you can actually upload music, and so you can have a playlist which plays in the background on Roll20, so everybody can hear it, both the players and, if you're streaming, I guess, the audience. But I never could get that to work in a way that I would be happy with, so I've never used it. In fact, I don't use music underneath my gaming because I've listened to people that do, I've watched people that do, and it works for them, but I'm not sure it would work for me quite as well. Plus, since I'm the one doing the streaming, I'm the one in control of OBS and all of that, it's just one more thing I have to pay attention to make sure it's working right, which when I have to worry about, is the stream working? Is the videos working? Are the cameras positioned correctly? Is all of this stuff working right? Then it becomes a bit of a problem that rolls in on itself, and I just don't want to add another level of complexity to this. I tried it once because I bought this, or I have this audio tool, but it doesn't work very well. Like, it was inexpensive, and unfortunately that meant it wasn't very good, and I don't want to spend money on a big one. And so I've kind of given you an intro on how D&D works, how Roll20 works, just so when you see like I usually put this up so you can see what's going on with the dice rolls. As the game progresses, you'll see the dice rolls progress. That's just to kind of give you a concept of what we're seeing, because of course we don't always mention them. We should. It's a trait that you'd think we'd have picked up by being podcasters, but unfortunately we're terrible at it. So you're like, oh, do you hit a blah blah? Did you roll a blah blah? You know, things that you should say every time and you forget. So like in the podcast version of it, you may not hear us actually mention what the damage was or what the roll was. Usually we try to, but it doesn't always work that way. So that's that basis. Let's see. So in discussing that, we've talked about Roll20, talked about D&D Beyond. Now we should probably talk about the actual character stuff. So what we'll do is we'll go quickly into here. You're not going to get to see everything. I'm certainly not going to give you backstory information or any of that. But here is my backgrounder for Rock of Cairbrinn as an example. There's the title. By the way, I should point out, I am actually wearing the Rock of Cairbrinn shirt that we have designed. It has Rock of Cairbrinn on the back. I don't know if you can see it if I turn. That's available in our shop, which I will link on the YouTube video later. So let's look at some other aspects. So let's go back to Rock of Cairbrinn itself. So here we go. So Rock of Cairbrinn is a story that is based on a world I created. It is based off a world that the players are unfamiliar with, the audience is unfamiliar with, but it has some links to an earlier podcast series we did called Fate of Heroes. I don't want to scroll too far here, but we can scroll down a bit. So when I created this, the idea was I always like to have a lot of information, and especially in a world that I'm creating from scratch, because the background of it, the basics of what's going on, what are the dynamics in society, how and who are the big bads, who are the leaders that either are good, bad, or indifferent to the world, what are the major events that might be coming to kind of link in things that are happening, and how do these things affect the players as they play the game. And so I know some dungeon masters don't play this way. Some people, they create their world in a very basic amount, and then they let the players basically build the world as they go, and that's perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. I know other DMs that spend long times creating their worlds. They'll consult with other people. They'll do a lot of research, try and bring up things so that they link to others. And that's kind of my category of thinking. I actually had someone who's into this kind of stuff have a look at it to kind of give me some pointers of how to make it better, which was very helpful, especially around culture and that kind of stuff, because I kind of am not very good at that. I'm much more built around the politics stuff and the military stuff. So it's good to have somebody's point of view who isn't mine. And so, as I said, gave me some pointers and some things to add to it to try and define some things. And you'll notice here's the list of the episodes. I gave them titles, although I went away from this very quickly because honestly, those are silly. I did put some up just for my own benefit so I could know roughly what the players were doing. So, again, to go into the backstory a little bit. So when we started out, what I usually do is I create the first kind of template of what I want to have happen in the episodes. This leads to a 3-paragraph thing or a 4-paragraph thing typically, because this is where I like to let the players dictate what's going on. I want to create the environment, but I don't want to influence what the player decides to do. So it's like, hey, this happens to you now. You've entered into this world. Here's the kind of the surroundings. Here's some of the reasons why this is happening. Here's your role in it, and what do you want to do now? based off of X, Y, and Z. So, like, we start out with Austin in this case. He starts out in a cave. His backstory, he's a hermit type, so he's been kind of mulling over different things. And he has a vision, which, as I noted here, is the story of Amber and Cara Bryn, which I will not explain what that is because you have to go back and watch this. I don't know that I do all of this because at the end of the day, sometimes you just, as you're going through it, you either forget what you've written down or you find other ways to do something similar. So I think it's really cool to sort of set the stage but not dictate every single thing. And then basically we put him on his journey. He's on his little mission. And so he's off to find the memorialist. And then we open up with that as his first session. And basically what these are is these are like session zeros, as they call them. So they do a little bit of role play, a little bit of fighting to kind of get used to their character. But it's not meant to kill them or get them into actual jeopardy. It's about building the character so that people get introduced to them. So the first 3 episodes of the series are about introducing the 3 characters that we were initially going to follow. In the first stream, it was actually Austin and Anthony. And I think I had Tamara listening in. And then when we did the second session, we did Tamara's part. And then we moved on into the actual, here's the story. So the idea was to set the players in place, get everybody used to who they are, what their roles were. You kind of meet them for the first time. You kind of get acquainted with them. And then, boom, off we go. And initially, the idea was they were supposed to be following the memorialist, who's basically this font of all knowledge, who's then taking them to sort of the next major step. I don't want her to be a key figure. She's just a key figure in that everybody knows who she is. But I wanted her to just drive them forward, to kind of assemble them as kind of the way that they come together. But that's it. She's not meant to be in charge. She's not meant to be their patron. She's just meant to get them going. And then later on, as we go through the story, she'll get mentioned occasionally, but she's not there. You don't know who she is, really. You don't know much about her outside of what they've been told. So that's the idea behind that. But the whole point of it was, because often in Dungeons and Dragons especially, it's very common for players to meet at locations. Sometimes the players have had past dealings with one another. A lot of times they haven't. A lot of times they're like a bunch of random strangers who are sitting in a bar when somebody comes in and makes them a group. Or conversely, they're like, we had a relationship in the past, or we're brother and sister, or, we're cousins, blah, 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 that kind of thing. So they do things to sort of artificially make this. So I kind of wanted to go away from that sort of atypical way and kind of break off from the mold. The audience will determine how successful that was. I liked it because it did, like I said, it went away from the old style and everybody got a chance to shine on their own to start with, so that you got their character. You know who they were. You knew what they liked. You weren't introducing other characters around them, so they got a full hour of just them. So that was kind of the point. So we introduced Pre last, and then the group joins up together. Basically, Bart, Shin, and Pre arrive together now, and now they have a mission. And they are sent off into the Elven Forest. And as they go in, about a week before this, young Rob had asked if he could join the group. And I was like, hey, that's a nice idea. I didn't think you could join because of the time he'd been busy. And he suddenly became available. And he's like, no, I can join in. So I was like, okay, cool. And so he's added to the party as a random dude that just shows up. And so we had to kind of come up with why he was showing up and who he is. And so we just kind of have him cause an issue for them and jump in. And in the end, everybody just kind of rolls with it. So it's kind of interesting because, like, you have to sort of play your character, but a lot of times you're like, well, we knew this guy was being brought in, so, whereas maybe realistically, people would be way more suspicious of this random dude that joined the group. So it's kind of funny in that respect, but it worked out okay. And then, of course, we have them fight their first big battle, which is they were fighting a a tree monster, basically. And it was kind of about, again, trying to develop their school skills, gain experience, and trying to develop that. So that was kind of the point. These are the Large Awakened, which is a homebrewed character I found online, so I used it. I really like them. They're cool. They're fun. They're low level, so they're not going to kill anybody unless they get super lucky. And basically the way I had it set up was if they did get knocked down, they wouldn't die, because that wasn't the point. So they wouldn't kill them outright no matter what. They'd just knock them out. And then they met the stranger, and then they eventually got to the castle with the elves. And it's at this point that I learned Pre's issues were going to be an ongoing problem. They weren't just sort of a flavor text thing, but rather that Pre had decided that no, I hate elves. I don't want anything to do with elves. I've gone so far as to like hide any existence of elves in my lineage. So I don't want nothing to do with these people. And all of a sudden that became an issue, which is great because from and I say this, and I'll give context to this. It's great in the fact that it gives your character some understanding of the world that they've now created, which didn't have to do with necessarily a full understanding of the DM. You just don't want it to become a problem, and that's when it creates an issue between the characters where, they're not working together or things aren't working, and so you have to sort of drag them along. And at this point, we had Austin, who was good at sort of rallying the group together, and because of that, he sort of made it, and it was kind of his mission after all. But that's kind of where we started out, and that was kind of where it went from there. And the whole concept is they would start off as a group, form around an idea, but the idea wasn't the model of the entire story. It was more about, this is just to get you going, and then you guys determine what you want to do. So I always gave them options and said, here's your options. What do you want to do? And eventually it became pretty obvious to me that that wasn't what the players wanted to do. They wanted a bit more guidance. They liked the higgledy-piggledy randomness, but they didn't like it so much that there was no guidelines. So I started to realize that I was going to have to put guidelines in place. So I started to come up with things like you'll see here. We'll scroll down a bit. So at one point I came up with, here's a bunch of stuff going on. Yeah, these hooks, as they're called in Dungeons and Dragons speak. So you have this hook and that hook and this hook and that hook. And they were all about, hey, here's a job you could do to make some money. Do you want to do that? And the hope is that they would pick one, and they eventually did. They ended up taking two, in fact, but originally they were a little hesitant to do any of them. And I started to realize that giving them so many options was actually helping me, because they weren't picking them, or they'd pick one and then somebody else would pick a different one, and then they'd argue about it, which can make for good role play, but sometimes it wasn't working quite the way I hoped. And you can see on the bottom, I started to give them options. I came up with so many different ones to try and say, hey, one of these has got to be interesting, right? And in the end, it was number 7 that they chose out of this list. They chose 7. And then they went back and did one of the other ones later, which was the sword, which was an Austin idea that he thought would be cool. And then nobody, once Austin left, really had cared. So then they didn't know why they'd gone and done it. And I was like, well, because it was somebody else who came up with the idea of doing it. And then we have, like I said, then the other thing you have to do as a DM, you have to come up with, as they go through these places and find stuff, you've got to write up what they are. Do they do something when they get them? What happens if they trigger something? So like the orb that Dimitri has, it has a bunch of stuff with it, which I'm not going to show you because there's a lot of secret-y stuff that we've never brushed yet, because he keeps rolling well. And so the orb has been very nice and has done him very good things. Eventually it will not, if he's unlucky. So anyway, so then you draw out kind of the ideas of what they're doing. They went from here, they went to they helped Clamdor, who we met in the last episode, a rather arbitrary and lusty gnome who just happens to be the ambassador for Veilguard, which is the kingdom they're in. He basically hits on everybody and doesn't really care. And so it was kind of funny because when they sort of mentioned, when I kind of brought up the merch stuff last time, which I brought up at random because I was like, okay, how do we, because one of the things you have to deal with when you're doing D&D sometimes is that players don't show up. And when a player doesn't show up and you've got them as a key part of the story, which is unfortunately what had happened with Jilly, it kind of forces you to kind of think on your feet a lot more than you planned. So then all of a sudden, instead of going south and going towards where they were supposed to be going, they're suddenly still stuck in the town. And you're like, okay, now how do I do this in a way that makes sense, or at least tells a story, if not the story? And that's where I came up with the idea sort of on the fly that there was more and more of this merch of not Bart, but Dimitri floating around. And then, of course, Bart came up with the idea of, hey, and Dimitri, of course, came up with the idea that I'm not getting a cut of this. What's going on? And so that then drove this whole story on. And you get famously, of course, to effectively what ends up happening, of course, is that it's Clamdor who's all behind it. And that kind of stuff is sort of fun and to play in. And if you go down to actually what I had written up initially, which is down here somewhere. Search for Pri. So this was the last session we did. And that is all the information I had written, which literally only talked about the kobolds, because I really didn't have an idea what the rest of them were going to do. So I had to come up with like, okay, how is this going to work? So this is where, if your DM's able to, they can think on their feet and just roll with it. Like, there was nothing in any of the stuff I had designed that brought up anything to do with this merch, that brought up anything to do with, kind of riffing on all of this fame and success he created for himself accidentally by singing a few songs to the wizards. But it just made sense. Like, the more he was out in public and performing, and the fact that he would roll really well performing, it just made sense that people would catch on, especially when he's performed for the opera and he's performed at the Wizard Tower in front of all these young wizards. So I kind of wanted to use that to sort of big up Dimitri's character a bit, kind of focus a little bit on him, but do it in a way that was a bit ridiculous, because let's be honest, it is ridiculous. So from that aspect, Rock of Carebrin's a lot more freewheeling, because there's no end story. Like, there's no, here's what's coming. They have to deal with this. It's going to destroy everything if they don't. I don't have that yet in this story. There's no real drive to that yet. There may be at some point, but right now it's more about go do this and become successful heroes. That's kind of your goal. And then after that, you can figure out if there's something else you want to do. And as we go, you may make enemies. You may make, you might run into fantastic things that can cause you all sorts of mischief. The orb, for example, may be a disaster eventually. The enemy they met at the temple certainly is, and he has not gone away. But they're not like end of the world events. They're more just player disturbance events. But you never know, right? Players can get into a bind in a battle, and all of a sudden, like, 3 of your player characters are dead, and your last guy doesn't have any spells left and can't resurrect anybody, and it can create all sorts of headaches for your characters, and then they have to make sort of decisions. I am of the opinion with Rock of Carebrin, if we reach that point where the characters die, then I would talk to the players about moving on from that series and into a different campaign and focus on a different group, rather than spending the time trying to bring in a whole new roster of characters. If you're going to do that, you may as well move forward in time or back in time and go through a different group, because I think that will tell a better story than just they live. Because sometimes you can get lost into, we're just doing the same thing over and over. We're always saving the world and everything's always in peril. Well, you don't want that because you don't want your world to be stuck in peril forever. So the idea is not to have a doomsday event every time. You need a doomsday event at least once, I think. But it doesn't have to be in everything. And maybe you don't even need it. Like maybe you can run a complete years of campaigning which never has a cataclysm at the end of it. Or at least not a direct one. You could have one that happens that the players have no control over, that influences them but they don't actually make or break about. Like say a natural disaster happens and all the player characters get to do is recover from it and trying to help people. So the story becomes about them helping to save people or not, to maybe turn their own way and try and earn money off the deal. So there's all sorts of ways that this can work, but you just have to think about it and come through and make decisions. So we've kind of talked about Rock of Cairbrinn a bit. We haven't gone into detail on characters. I don't want to give away a lot of information because some of their backstories are unique. But if you go through the first 3 episodes, you get an idea of what the first 3 characters are like. And B's character who's been added and Jilly's character who's been added afterwards and Rob's are all becoming defined as you watch the series. But certainly they have their own qualities and interesting backstories, which will become more detailed and more pronounced as we go through it. We haven't really brushed the surface of some of their backstories at all. Like, I don't think anybody really knows what Bart's backstory is other than he was a guard. Why does he flip the coin? What is it about his life that's determined all of this? What's the fascination that Lou has for him? Why is she following him around? Funny enough, it was his idea to come up with Lou bothering him, which I think was hilarious. I didn't even remember that. And then I was looking back at a note that he'd written me where he told me to do that. I was like, oh, okay. And it was just so funny because I had the perfect character for it. So I was like, okay, cool. I got the perfect god for this story. So yeah. So to go in complete opposite, as you can see here, before the coming apocalypse. So without going into full detail about what's going on here, this one has Copper Guardians. I had a much more clear idea what the goal of the story is. It's not the end of the story, I will say that. So there's a goal in mind. With the goal, it will drive the story. But it is not the end goal necessarily. It's more about we get to this point and then the people playing can decide whether they want to end there or not. They may not. And if they don't, then great. We can continue on forward from that point. And again, going back to do they save people? Do they do, how do they help civilization in crisis? That kind of thing. So there's all sorts of ways you can kind of bring it. So what I did with this is I came up with, I'm going to be honest, I was influenced heavily by Critical Role, which is a streaming group on Twitch. Is they did a side story called EXU Calamity. And if you've never watched like a streamed D&D event, you can watch that one having no background because it's a story more than it is D&D. I'm going to put it that way. And because the characters are not from any existing campaign, they don't have any relationship with the campaigns, that you don't need to have watched the years and years of content to understand what's going on, because you can sit there and watch all 4 episodes. It's completely contained. It's like a Netflix series. The difference is, of course, is like each session is like minimum 5 hours. So you're in for the long haul, but nonetheless, it is an amazing series. It tells an amazing story. Starts off with Brennan just reading this long litany of stuff going on, and he just sort of introduces the character as this stuff is happening, and the character has to, the player has to kind of go, okay, well,
Fire. Everything feels slow. There's movement and there's heat, but the only noise you can hear, despite all this chaos, is breath. It's yours, but it's also a stranger's. It's like someone else is using your body to breathe. You're stumbling. Luis, I need you to describe your character and tell us your character's name, but I would love for you to do that with the understanding that your mouth is filled with blood.
And so I wanted to kind of ape that a bit with this intro, which is what I kind of did, to seem a little bit more intense and be a little vague, but give us something we wanted. So that was a big thing. And then we kind of freelanced, as you can tell by the one line in the second session. And then the idea is to spend a session or two on the airship, having them travel, having them deal with enemies, which again, we come up with that. And then they, in the last session, made it to a tent city. And this is where the cultural aspect comes in, because you're like, okay, I want them to come into a lived environment where things are going on, and it's weird because it's not normal. And I want them to start to question and wonder and explore and kind of figure these things out, which is where I wanted them to go with it, which is why it was so great that they were able to catch on to that and leap on that idea. So it made it a lot easier for me in that regard. So lastly, I think the last thing I want to talk about, hopefully this has been helpful in kind of understanding where the characters are, how to do things in the games, that we're talking about things, you're not completely confused. And if you ask questions and you want to ask me questions outside of the game, I'm certainly happy to help. Everybody like Rob, myself, Webby, have loads of experience with D&D. They know the game even better than I do, so they can answer questions that I am not well averse to understanding necessarily. Hopefully it's given you kind of an understanding of the way the world works and kind of how the story has gone so far. Copper Guardians we're only just barely into. Like, we've only done 4 YouTube episodes and 2 sessions. So you can quickly, I think it's 4 or is it 6? I don't remember. But you can quickly catch up. So I would always advise that if you want to catch up to what we're doing, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/distractionsmedia. That's where all these will go on to after they've been streamed. Thank you all for watching this evening, or if you're watching after the fact, thank you for viewing the VOD. I hope it's been informative. Hopefully it answers some questions at least. If it hasn't, like I said, be sure to ask me questions. You can always reach out to me. If you want to email me stuff, you can email it to distractionsmedia@gmail.com, and I will look at it and hopefully get back to you quickly. Or you can reach out to me personally on Twitter or on Discord, on our Discord channel, and we'll certainly help you there. And yeah, because I don't want people going into this stream confused. I want you guys to kind of be able to pick up the story and roll with it if you can, and understand how characters are made and how they're influencing the game and how they do things. So like, dice rolls are important, but they're not critical to everything. A backstory is just as important, if not more important, to your rolling. Certainly you make a character to be good at dice rolling. Usually you don't want them to be bad, because then it makes your life kind of miserable, but it's not the end all be all of everything you're wanting to do with D&D. So because it's a group storytelling, right? Everybody participates in the story. Everybody contributes their own background and their own ideas, and we create the story that way. Tamara's character very much has added to our story in ways I didn't anticipate when she came up with Pre. B's character, very similar in both campaigns. They're influencing the game in different ways, but they're still influencing the game. And the story I'm telling is coming out of that. So certainly it's a way to sort of continue to advance along the story and make it so that people are excited. And I hope you're excited for the story. And as we continue, hopefully you'll have a lot of fun. If you'd like to subscribe to our channel, please do so here. If you would like to see what we've done in the past, please check it out up here. And if you'd like to check out all of our content, you can do so at distractionsmedia.com.